Good evening. We started discussing about Reacts. So in React hooks, we learned about use state and use effect. These are the hooks. Another we will see today how do we use context. So for that, we need some basic points. So first question is what is context memory? What is context memory? So context is a reference for memory. Context means memory. So what is context? It is nothing but it is allocated for a component. It is the memory allocated for a component and accessible to other components that run within the context context of current component. This is the point actually. So it is context is the memory allocated for a component and accessible to other components that run within context. That means component related memory. This is the component. The component be located context. This context is available to other components that run within the context. Some other component is running. Some other component is running within the context. Then it is accessible to those. That is the memory. It is the memory allocated for component and accessible to the components that run within the context of current component. So that means what is the purpose? What is the purpose of context memory? It enables sharing of across components configured in multi-level hierarchy. That means the components that are configured in multi-level hierarchy means one component in a component. It is a multi-level hierarchy. In that multi-hierarchy, sharing data from one component to another can be done by using. That means a high component can share its data to lower component, higher component its data. So that means you can say outer to inner, right? That is what actually outer component and inner component. That is the purpose of context memory. Where we do this in general environment. So yesterday already I told you, suppose user logs in with profile and he need to be paired other components which are being accessed within the login, right? That we have to define, right? So technically this memory works. This context memory is configured. We will see one example. So for that, we need this use context. So what is the purpose of use context hook here is, see, generally it is not like properties, right? So it is not properties, because properties are parameters passed into properties. We have seen through properties we can share the data. So through properties we can share the data, but properties problem is nothing but properties are configured as the members of that particular component. Properties are members of that component. So context is not a member of component. Context is the memory. Context is the memory. Property is not the memory. Property is a member. Property is a member, right? And already we learned properties are mandatory, right? Properties can be configured as optional, right? Here it is not at all related to properties, completely not related to properties. So properties are nothing but it is not sharing data. Properties main concept is not sharing data. Properties main concept is passing data. Passing data, sharing data is completely different. That means, so a property is there means it is assigned with a value, right? Context is memory. So in this memory, there can be so many things happening, right? It is not just certain, right? So it is completely not related to properties. Okay, right. Now, what is the main purpose is, so it also enables, yesterday we discussed 2 points. It also enables to share data across multiple requests of same component. Am I right? I told you that context is not only for other components, it is used for the same component. If same component is loaded again and again, if same component is loaded again and again, what will happen? If same component is loaded again and again, the previous values need to be available for the next occurrence. In that case, data for same component across multiple requests also can be made available by using context. Not only sharing data with others, that context memory is available for the component if the same component is loaded again. That means the previous context memory can be accessed and used. That is another point. So it also enables to share data across multiple requests of same component, right? That is why it is never related to properties or like properties, right? That is the purpose of context memory. How do we configure? We will see. That means what are the various stages? That means implementing context. How we can implement context? Implementing context, so using React hooks. How to implement context using React hook? That's what we are going to see now. How we can implement the context. For that, so many points are there. Actually, first thing you need to know is context. Context uses dependency injection. So context uses dependency injection mechanism. Context uses dependency injection mechanism, DI. So what is dependency injection mechanism? So actually DI is a technique. So that defines how an object get holds of its dependencies. How an object get holds of its dependencies, that is what actually technique. Dependency injection is a technique that defines how an object get holds of its dependencies. That means, so how it locates, and injects the dependencies. So how it locates and injects the dependencies. It is about how. So you can say it is about how it locates the dependencies and injects them. Dependency injection is about how it locates the dependencies and how it injects them. That means, for example, you are trying to use, for example, I will give you a general option. Like, suppose if you have learned anything like some bootstrap, right? Suppose you have learned something like bootstrap. Actually, bootstrap is a library. In this bootstrap, we have a library called carousel.js. Carousel library is used for designing sliding banners and all. We need them. Actually, it uses jQuery attributes like data, BS, right? So data, so BS interval. So many jQuery attributes are there. These are all jQuery attributes. That means this carousel.js is using lot of jQuery functions. It is using lot of jQuery functions. If you include this in a web page and you try to use carousel, it will not work. So carousel contains all the logic for designing carousel. When you include this and design a carousel and try to use it, it will not work. Why it will not work? Because it is using some jQuery functions, and those jQuery functions are accessed from another file called jQuery.js. That means, what is this jQuery.js? It is the core library, and now it is the dependency of carousel. That means carousel cannot work until you include the jQuery, because that is the main library which have the functions being used by carousel. So in that case, that jQuery.js is a dependency which it has to inject in order to use that function. So this is basic general dependency injection mechanism. And very important, DI depends on two components. Dependency injection depends on two components. One we call as provider. Another one we call as injector. Dependency injection depends on two components. One is provider and injector. What is provider? Actually, provider is responsible for locating the dependencies. Provider is responsible for locating the dependencies in memory. In memory where the dependencies are present. So it is going to locate the dependencies. Provider, so that means it stores data, and it stores and locates data. That means provider will provide data, and it is responsible for locating the data in memory. So when you request for any data, that data is available in the memory. Who is going to map to the data and pick it up? That is done by provider. So provider's responsibility is to map to the data which is present in the memory. After locating the data, now this need to be injected into another component. That means that is done by injector. So injector is responsible for injecting the data into component, So injector is responsible for injecting the data into component. First locating and then injecting. These two are the important components in dependency injection mechanism. So the context, that means, so React context hook, use context, uses provider and injector. It uses both provider and injector. It is going to use provider and injector. How the provider is defined and how the injector is defined, these two things we will see. How to configure the provider and how do we configure the injectors. So use context uses dependency injection mechanism. One more is there. Actually, use context. This is not officially anywhere mentioned, but internally it is, architecturally it is doing it. Actually, so use context acts as a service, Use context acts as a service. It follows dependency injection mechanism. That means anyone following dependency injection is recognized as a service. Use context acts, and actually service follows singleton pattern. I know that. What is singleton pattern? Service follows a singleton pattern. What is singleton pattern? Singleton is a software design pattern, right? What is singleton design pattern? Singleton design pattern. So singleton, in simple terms, for a class, how many objects we can create? Any number of objects. But if a class is designed in such a way that you can create only one object, then it is singleton. That means you can design a class in such a way that only one object can be created, right? If you try to create another object for this, it cannot. So that means object is created only for the first request, and the same object will be used for all. Object is created for first request and the same object is used for all. That is singleton. That means a class is designed in such a way that only one instance can be there for a class. Only one instance can be there for a class. Actually, we have two mechanisms, single call and singleton. At some experience level interviews, means if they like to go in depth about the concept, they can ask like, what is factory and what is a service? Difference between a factory and a service. Actually, factory is a set of functions and values. Service is nothing but set of factories. Set of factories is service. Some set of factories we can keep in a service. Now we are designing an application. When we are designing an application, in that application, we want to use the functions and values. We don't prefer to use directly a factory. We don't prefer to directly use a factory. We prefer using a service. Why? Factory also same. Then why service? Because factory follows single call mechanism. single call mechanism, and service follows singleton mechanism. Service follows singleton mechanism. What is single call mechanism? Single call mechanism is nothing but, so an object is created. An object is created. That means we have, suppose, client, so client 1, client 2, so client 3. So many clients are present. Now they are requesting for some resource. Then what happens? The first client makes a request, an object is created, and through that object he can access the resource. Now second client makes a request. Then what will happen is this object will be duplicated. Another object is created. For another client, another object is created. That means for every request, a new object is created. And through that object, the resource is given to access. That means function. Then I have to create an object. Through that object, I have to access the function. I finished. Now I want that function again. If I want the function again object need to be created. Every time you need a function, an object need to be created. That's very complex. That means we want object to be created only once, and the same object should be used across any number of requests. Context uses that mechanism. Context uses a singleton pattern. Singleton pattern means object is created for the first request, and the same object will be used across number of requests. That is called singleton. So we have single call and we have singleton. So this is actually singleton mechanism. So technically context uses singleton mechanism. Context uses singleton pattern. Service follows anywhere. Say context is a service. That means it is following a singleton. Right? In many occasions, people have an habit of saying that context is a service. Like that cookie is a service. Session is a service, like that. That means if they say that it is a service, that means it follows singleton pattern. If say that it is a service, it uses dependency injection mechanism. If it is a service, it will have a provider and a injector. These all terms are common for services, and context is used as a service. That means why it is used as why it is called a service? Because it's a hook, but it is technically a service. Why it is called as a service? Because are you designing context? Are you designing context? No, we are using context. We are not designing context. Hook is a service. Every hook is a service. Why? Because every hook is not created by you. Inbuilt hooks, I am saying. Inbuilt hooks, all these hooks are created by somebody and you are using them. That means everything is a service. Every predefined hook that you are using in React is a service. That means it is predefined. Predefined means readily functioning. You are just using it. So you are not defining context. You are using context. That is the reason the word use. Right? That is the word use. Right? Use effect, use context. The meaning of that architecturally, that is the meaning actually. Architecturally, it means that you are using a service. You are using a service, right? That is what actual. So it follows a singleton pattern. Singleton pattern means nothing but singleton pattern creates an instance for first request. And uses the same across multiple requests. That's what actually singleton pattern. That means technically only one instance can be defined for a class. Actual point is, so that is singleton mechanism, and use context uses it. Now, how we have to configure, how do we implement this? So for that, step one, first step, what we have to do is, so first you have to create a new context memory. You have to create a memory for component. You have to create a new context memory for component. And for that, actually, to create a new context memory for component, so React core library provides a function. Core library provides a function, create context. It provides a function called create context. So in order to use context, first you have to create context. You have to create the context. That means we have to create a context memory first. And context memory is created by the React core library. That means what we have to do is, so we have to create a reference like this. That means, so we have to define a constant and a reference name. This is nothing but context name. And here we have to define react dot create context. We need to create context. And by default, context is null, empty. That means null. What is the meaning of null? Null means the value is expected. The value is expected dynamically. What is difference between null and undefined? Huh? What is difference between null and undefined? So the difference between null and undefined, what is difference between null and undefined is, undefined means a value is not supplied during compile time. If value is not supplied during compile time, then it is designated as undefined. If the value is not supplied at runtime, then it is configured as null. It is configured as null. Null is considered as exception. Null exceptions will come. What is meant by exception? Exceptions are runtime only. Na? Exceptions will not occur compile time. Exceptions will occur only runtime. Right? That means it is expecting a value dynamically. So initially it is null. Right? So now we configured that context. So context is created. After creating the context, into the context we need to store some value. Into the context we have to store some value. Context is created. After the context is created, we have to store some value into the context, right? Let's see how we can store the value into the context. So step 2, that means you have to provide value into context. You have to provide value into context. We need to provide value into context. Now, who is responsible for providing value into the context? Locating the values and storing the values. This is all maintained by a provider. Context will have a provider and injector. Provider is responsible for providing value into the context and locating the value from the context. Providing the value, locating the value, both are managed by provider. So we have to write like this. Actually, syntax, these are all syntax. That means syntactically how you write. Now syntactically how we define here, we have to use this context name dot, we have a provider. That means context name provider, and it will have a value into that. You have to provide your value. Whatever value you want, you need to provide that value into it. And we have to define context name dot provider. Now, this is the way how you provide values into the context, how we can provide value into the context. So providing value, you can see context name dot provider. So that means context is using a provider. This provider will set value and get the value. Provider is responsible for getting the value and setting the value. And remember, this context, so I written this as a tag. What do you mean by this? I written this like a tag. What do you mean by this? Anything? One second. Yep. So what is it? What does it means? What does this means? What does this means? Why I written like a tag? It is nothing but this is the scope of context. That means context is not available outside this. That means you created context now. It can provider can locate and provide for any component which is running within this context. Understood? That means this is the scope. Scope means what? All components so must be within the context. All components must be within the context provider scope. Understood? It must be within the provider scope. That means this indicates that now the memory is available for scope, within the scope. That means any component is outside this scope cannot access the context. That means in order to access the context, every component must be within this scope. So we have to access these values. This value can be any type. Understood? It can be any type. That means it can be a string or a null, undefined, or a Boolean, number, object, array, anything. The value can be anything, and you can access and you can use the values. So technically, 2 points now. First, you have to create a context. Second, you have to provide value into the context. Now the third step, so step 3, that means context is ready. So third step, you have to inject into any component. You have to inject any component. That means this value you have to inject into any component. So any component must able to access this context. That means the inner component here. So inner component, so have to access the context. The inner component have to access the context. That means you created a context, then inner have to access the context. How to access the context? What we have to do is, For that, syntactically, how to access the context. So we have to create a reference. That means we have to create a reference, and this reference will access the context by using the hook use context. By using the hook use context, which you have to find the context name. That means inside this context, whatever data is there, that is accessed and is stored in this reference. So use context is a hook which is used for using the context memory, not for creating. That means use context is not responsible for creating context. It is responsible for using context. Using context. So that means creating context, React will do. Creating context, React will do. Using context, the hook will do. That means use context will not create and use the context. It is just using the context. So we have to create the context, we have to provide the data into context, then we have to use the context. So 3 stages will be there. The first stage, create. Second, use it. This is the process of implementing content stage. An example now. Practically, we will see how this works. Right? Let's create one example how this practically works. Context. So I will create one new component here. I will create a component called context demo. Okay, .js. Okay, let's create export default function. So context demo. Okay, so then it will return some presentation. So container fluid, yeah, and here I will context demo. Fine. Okay, let's keep this in the startup first. Yeah, so context demo, it is imported. Fine. So that is ready. Context demo is working. It's fine. Now here we will create some hierarchy here, right? Let's create a hierarchy like this. So we will design here another function. So this is home component. Okay, home component is a function which will return some container and here home. Okay, I will just put here home. So this is the home component. That is the home component defined. Now I will create another function. So navbar component. Navbar component. Navbar component. So we will do one thing. This I will give as header component. This is header component. In the header component, I will just give this as home. Okay, or some site name home. Okay, just for our understanding sake, initially I will say header. Later we will make the changes. Navbar component, it written, and so what we will do is we will create a div, and here we are defining some class name btn toolbar, btn toolbar, yeah, and I will give some bg dark text white, just t5 content between. Okay, so I will create some other div here. Yeah, so class name is btn group. So here we will add a button. Okay, then he finds some Amazon something like, okay, and here we have another button group. So this is having class btn dark. Okay, this is also class name. Just we are using some options here. Just I will keep empty there. This button later we will keep some data. Actually, this is user will come here later. I will display. Now this is the main component I am doing. This is context. Here I am accessing. Here I am accessing the header component. Right? We are accessing header component. Here we are accessing header component. That means header component comes here. Header component comes here. Right? So what I will do is inside the component, inside the header component, I am accessing bar component. Inside the header component, the navbar is header. The navbar is inside header. Right? I will remove the context demo. So we have a header component. Let's keep this header component class name. So bg, suppose light. Okay, it will be fine. So, or I will give as info text white. It's fine. And this height, I will give style. Some I will suppose 250 pixels, so that I can clearly show the component. Yeah, that is fine. 150 looks enough. Header. Okay, and here I will also give padding as some 10 pixel, some space that looks better. Okay, now here what is the concept is, now you see 3 levels are there actually. That means 3 levels. Why I'm telling 3 levels? Because so above the header also you have a option. Above the header, this is your site home. Okay, I will just give here site index, suppose like site index, right? This is the parent. Inside that we have a header. Inside header we have a navbar. Right now, whenever anybody generally logs in, what we will do is at the time of logging in, we will collect his credentials, and this site index will collect the credentials, his details, and it should pass his details to home, and it should pass from home to navbar. That means it must be available to multi-level. But actually anything of one component is not accessible to another. Every component have individual context memory. Now we want the context. Now what is the context here? How do we create? We have to create context for index. We have to create the context for index. So how do we create the context for index? Let's go. And here we have to import. We have to import React. We have to import React. So not React from. So from, we have to import React from React. We have to import this. Not only that, we need to import another one. So we have to import use context. We have to import this use context, right? So we are configuring another one. To store the data, we need use state. We are configuring a state, right? So that means whatever data entered by user, first it will come to state. In the state, from the state we will send to context. From the state we will send to context, because state is only for current component. Context will be made available to the components which run within the context also. So we have these two options configured. Now this is the context demo. This is the main. Context demo is the main. That means that is the index. Now create context. That means we have to define constant. I will give as user details context is equal to React. We have React dot create context. We have to use create context, and it will be default what? Null. That means now you created the context memory. You created the context memory and its name is user details context. Now this site index must use this context. That site index must use this context. That means now this everything what you have to do is you have to put in user details context. Am I right? You have to define in user details context, but not directly user details context. User detail context dot what? Provider. You have to define this. That means I will put here user details context. User details context dot what? Provider. We have to use that provider. That is the scope. In that scope, everything will come. Understood? That means the header component is in that context scope. That header content is in the context scope. That means, okay, now very important, inside header again there is a component called navbar. Inside that there is a navbar. So here now context is expecting some data. Context is expecting some data. That means you have a provider and you can see some error is there. So let's go into this console and you can see, so there is some error. That is the error where it correctly mentions the catching of error. So you have means the correct name of the error we need to define. It should say out of range anywhere there. Error boundary. It is having this error boundary. Tree handling error occurred. Okay, fine. Now see what is the problem here is, means already I told you that needs a provider. That provider needs a value. So we have to configure a value. What is the value it should use? The context, what is the value it have to use? Actually, so this is the context provider, and remember it have to use a value. That value later we can collect from other sources. As of now, I will define a constant and we will create user details, and we will use state. Okay, use state, and here we will put so user name as some John, and for example I am giving some email as some john@gmail.com. Like this I am defining user details, and what this is the data. User details is the data. Now our context must use the data. Context should use the data. That means it uses the data by using value. What data it should use? User details. That is the data. So user details is the data it have to use. That means that is the data we configured. So here still one problem is there. What is this? That is the context provider. Okay, let's inject also, right? Context provider, we have to use that also, we will see. Because it is saying unknown element, it's no problem. So it is nothing but it is saying that user details context is an unknown element. It doesn't matter because we know that it is not an element. Am I right? So it is not an element, it is just configured. Okay. Now, next step, after configuring this, now we have to use this text. We have to use this context in which location? User details. These user details can be displayed anywhere. For example, current component can use that user details. Current component, because it is state. That means how it can do, suppose in the site index, I am just defining who logged in. That means user details dot what user name. We are accessing that user details dot username. That means our intention is to display at the home user details username. Fine. Next step, what we have to do. So another step, what we have to do in header component, we have to access that context and use it here. So we have to access that and use it in the header component. And in the navbar component also, we have to access and use it. Then how we have to manage? That means we need to access by using which one? Use context. That means now let's component. In header component, we have to access the component. How do we access that? So generally what we have to do, this, yeah, we need to define constant. What is it? User details. So we have to use the hook. What is the hook? Use context. Use context, and it is expecting the context name. Context name. Context name is user details context. That is the context name. That means whatever the data is present inside this context, so it will be stored in this reference. That means you are accessing the context memory by using use context. You cannot access its state here. That means the state is only for that component. You can access its context by using context, and this you can display at the home also. I am displaying user details. User details dot which one? Username. We are accessing that. Now in navbar component, I want to use the same context. Then same, what we have to do in the navbar component also, we have to import. What is it? We have to configure. So constant, what is it? User details, and use context. Use context, what is it? User details context. We have to access user details context, and through that you can access and display. Suppose here I want to display the user name, and what we will do, user details dot what? User name. That is how we are configuring the component. That means context is created for the parent, and this is being accessed in header, and inside the header there is a navbar. It is being accessed into the navbar. So that is the component how we configured. Now let's, some still issues are there here. User details context not defined. Why it is not defined? It is there. User details. two locations, it is unable to find. Let, let's check this context is there correctly configured once. Means issue with the provider, I think we'll see. We'll keep this empty first. Level by level, we will check once where is the issue. Is there a problem in creating context only? Let's check. The problem in creating context only. Yeah? So let's import React from React and use state. React dot create context. Create context is returning context. It have a provider, consumer, display name. It's working fine. Okay. It is of type context. Huh? So we mentioned provider correctly. Yeah? Yes, Rohit.
I think need to import create context.
Create context is a function of React class. You don't need to import a function, right? It's a function. Let's change. It's a generic type only. It is null type configured. Actually, this is any type. No, no. Any is not defined. Generic only. I'll check the example already I have here. So context example is this one. It is configured a general variable. What it is return type is this function create context. Return type is context. Let's go to definition. Context is an interface, so which have provider, consumer, and display name. These are three properties actually: provider, consumer, and display name. That means actually, so here we don't need to destruct. Understood? We don't need to destruct it. Okay. Why? Because destruct is only when you do, if it is an array. If it is returning an array, actually it is returning an object, and that object contains three properties: provider, consumer, and others. So this is user details context. Constant. Now it looks okay, right? Yeah. So that means it is not destructing. So we are just using the context. Fine. Let make a correction here. So means the type. Yeah, this is just the context name. Context name, right? We are configuring. And one more is don't use a constant now. So use a var. Why? Because if I use a context constant, then you cannot reassign any value, right? So we will do one more change. What is it? Var. Change it to var. Okay, fine. So user details context, fine. Now it is ready. Now we need to configure this for this application. So here what we have to do, user details context dot what provider, then it will get that and display. So I am adding this here, that, and that is the provider configured for it. So it is fine. Provider is there. Provider needs a value na. So the value for the provider comes from where? User details. Here we have to get the user details. The value will come from user details. That means that user details value will be here. John is here. Now that is state related value. We need to send this to home, and we need to send navbar. So that means now we have to access this in the header component. In the header component, what we have to do? So in the header component, we need to create a constant, and we need to define a reference. So we will use a constant, and we need to define user details. User details, it will use context. Which context? Context name. What is the context name? User details context. We have to collect the data, and we can display that here. So here we can access user details. User details dot what? Username. We are accessing the user details username. So any problem here again? User details context. Means in the consuming one issue. So data is assigned, coming fine. Yep. Use context is declared, right? So the context name is missing. It should display that message. Reading the context. So the context name is user details context only. This context must be available. It's a context type only. It should be defined once. Let me check. Hmm. Capitalization. No, no. This is reference. This one. No, no. That is this. Locally, we are creating a reference. In that reference, we are collecting the context. Right? Whatever context is there, we are collecting here. And we are storing in a local reference. This local reference can collect the data present inside context, right? So somewhere is not defined. Yes, Kamlesh.
Sir, is there anything called scope of that user details context, sir?
Already it is in the scope
Uh,
because that is the parent scope now. This is the parent scope, right?
yes, sir. Previously, it was declared in the above user detail context. Could you please go up some more, sir? Yeah, okay. In that it should be outside of the function, no, sir. Export. I mean,
we created only here
inside. Yes, sir.
Inside the function.
Yes, sir.
So this is not accessible outside. Yes. Good.
Yes,
right.
Sir.
Yeah. Yeah, we declared this inside this function. We need to make it global because we are trying to access inside. So this is making it as function scope. We will make it as global scope. Okay. Right. That is the problem. Right. So we are creating the context because if you want to use across various functions, it should be in global scope. Okay. Now this is fine, right? Now it is accessible here also, right? We are accessing in the main and it is accessible in the home. Same must be accessible inside Amazon, this navbar also. So where to do? We in the navbar also we have to create user details is equal to use context, and here we have user details context, and here also we can access user details dot what user name, or here I can access email, right? Whatever it is having the details, and we can access and display. That means the context declared at the parent, it is accessible inside the child and inside its inner child. That means data is transported across multi-level hierarchy. So for that, we need to configure the context in this way. So context memory, that means our hierarchy is working in this way. So what is the hierarchy? We have site index. In that site index, we are generating another component. What is that component? Header. Right? Inside the header component, we are having a navbar. We are having a navbar. This is navbar, right? Now context is created. Context is created. That means here context is created for the parent, and this context contains username and email. This username and email is accessible to header and it is accessible to the navbar. That is the configuration of the context and defining them. We can pass directly data through any input controls. I am just configuring some details here, and we are trying to send these details across the components. That means once you create a context and configure the context, this context will be available within this scope. That means in that scope, whatever component is running, so it can access the context and use it. So for example, if this header component is outside the scope, then it cannot access the context memory. So in order to access the context memory, we need to create a reference, and through the reference using use context, we have to access the context and you can use the data. So first create context, then inject context and use in application. Here I created simple sample data. You can set the data dynamically, right? For example, if it is having, so set user details. If it is having just set user details and username is suppose empty and email is also empty, we are not configuring anything, then actually the site index, this is the site index. Suppose it is having a simple data list with the data term, so username and data definition input type is text. So input type is text, and here we have another email and data definition. We have input type is equal to email. Okay, and we need a button. Just we add a button. So we just added a button. So say login. Just I am just using the option login. Currently I am not using. I will simply put set data, right? Just like this. Later we will see navigation, login, and all these things. Now initially when set data is clicked, we need to set these details. A general process you know already. What we have to do is we have to configure a function. So this function is handle user, and we'll get the values, right? And we will keep, so set user details. Set user details, in this we will put a username. So username will be e dot target dot value, and we have email. Email is, so user details dot email, right? Whatever email is there. Similarly, we have another option, that is handle email. So here it will be user details dot email, and here it will be e dot target dot value. Okay, and one more is on button click function, handle set, right? And handle set will have, so user details, set user details, and it has to get both the user details and display. So user details have a user name. Username also will come from user details dot username. Another one, user details dot email. We have to collect the data. This is done. So we are going to set the values into it. For on text box, we have to configure. On change, it is handle, user, and here on change. So this is handle, email, and handle, email, and on button click. On click is equal to handle set. So handle set. These are the options to configure. Now, important is our intention is to design this presentation. That means you entered the username and you can see it is updating there. Right? You are entering the email. So, and it is updating here. Right? We are configuring the details. Set data also will do it. Right? We need to configure that and access and use it here. So whatever data you are collecting and configuring, we have to access and define. Right? This we will implement later with a concept of login, user details. This after login screen will navigate. We will take to inbox. In that we will display his details and show them. Right? That is later. Means how to edit the data, how do we configure the data, we will see later. Right? But this is simple example of working with the context. Just I will give this example for context. So this is an example for working with the context. Right? Now, once you know the context, now what is the scope of context and what is the lifespan of context? The scope of context is so from the parent to the inner. Now, what is the lifespan of context? Until the component is there. Once we close the component, then it is gone. But if I want the data to be available even when the component ends, the data must be available. So next, again, when we want, we can access it from any another location. Then we can use another one, that is use cookies. There is another hook, cookies. So by using cookies, you can even save the data for few days. I hope you know about cookies. We will see now. So cookies can save data in your hard drive for few days. That means even you close the application, you open next time, it will be available if cookie is there. That means data can be made available even after the component closed and application closed. Even when the application closed, the cookie is available for that application. We can make that by using cookies. Now this is very important. Every website sign in happens through cookies. Right? Now we will see how to use cookies in React. Right? How do we install, configure, and work with cookies tomorrow? Right? In tomorrow's session, we will discuss about cookies, how React works with cookies. This all together, we will put in one example. That means later. So when we go further, we will put all these in one example and we will see where they are really implemented. Right? Tomorrow we'll see about this.